Hey everyone, this is Pallavi and I'm back with the third game of the book called Chess, the Art of Logical Thinking by Neil MacDonald. This game was played between Kasparov and Bacrot in Sarajevo in the year 2000. The opening played in this game was Scotch opening. Let's start. White started with e4, controlling the center and making way for the queen and bishop to come out, and also controlling the f5 and d5 square. e5. Black 2 occupying half of the center, making way for the queen and the a8 bishop to come out. Also, it's controlling the d4 and f4 square. Knight f3. Developing towards the center with the threat on the e5 pawn. Knight c6. Develops towards the center and supports the e5 pawn. d4. White provokes an immediate crisis in the center by challenging the e5 pawn. Meanwhile, it opens up a diagonal for the c1 bishop. E takes d4. Black cannot stand his ground with d6 as d takes e5, d takes e5, queen takes d8 check forces him to give up castling with king takes d8. And if knight takes d8, drops a pawn to knight takes e5. So black played e takes d4. Knight takes d4. White now has a small space advantage as the enemy pawn on e5 has been eliminated, whilst his own pawn still stands on e4, controlling the d5 and f5 square. Now black played knight to f6, a sensible move that develops and targets the e4 pawn. A fundamental mistake would be the exchange knight takes d4, as after queen takes d4, the white queen is well placed in the center and can only be driven away by c5, which would be seriously weakening move as it blocks the f8 bishop and creates a backward pawn on d7. So knight f6, then knight takes c6. White prepares to advance the e pawn to get it out of range of the knight on f6. If instead knight c3, then bishop b4, it would pin the knight on c3, renewing the threat on knight takes e4, which gives black an active play. So white played knight takes c6 and now black played b takes c6. The correct recapture, as d takes c6 would, if d takes c6, then queen takes d8 check, king takes d8, and that would cost black the right to castle. Now black now has doubled pawn on c file after b takes c6, but he hopes that they will be of value in guarding the d5 square and also in opening a gap to develop the queen's bishop via b7. So white played e5. The idea behind the exchange on c6, the pawn advance gains more space and aims to drive the black knight from its beloved post on f6. So black played knight e7, queen e7. The hunter hunted. Black pins the pawn, which must now be defended. Queen e2. White retaliates accordingly because following f4, following with f4 instead of queen e2, then d6, the white center is falling apart. Now both queens are obstructing the development of their respective king's bishops and leading to shared developmental challenges. Black played knight d5. The knight is forced to move but at least stays active. c4. Kasparov is determined not to allow the knight to remain undisturbed on a center square. Bishop a6. Rather than retreating the knight, Bacrot pins the pawn and develops another piece. Pawn to b3. This solidifies the barrier against the bishop as white wants to prove that it is badly placed on a6 rather than developed to a good square. g6. With the e7 escape route blocked, black prepares to develop the bishop on g7 as an alternative. This option becomes particularly appealing since white has weakened the long diagonal, the a1 and h8 diagonal, with their recent move. f4. White adds support to the center pawn. Queen b4 check. Because of his lead in development, black tries to play dynamically. He reroutes his queen to b6, where she enjoys an excellent diagonal with the gain of time, since it's a check. Bishop to d2. If knight d2, then knight takes f4. That's why bishop d2. Queen b6, planning queen d4, gaining the rook. Now white played queen e4, preventing queen d4 and threatening to play c takes d5. Black played f5. Offering a pawn is a worthwhile move to maintain the momentum of black's initiative. If white plays e takes f6 with a discovered check on the king, then king goes to f7. It opens up the way for the rook to e8, leading to a queen capture and leaving white with no opportunity to capture the knight. So after f5, now white played queen f3. As white is behind in development, it is essential to keep the position closed. Queen d4. The tempting move loses its momentum in the long run. Instead, knight d4 with the intention of forking on c2, followed by king d1, then bishop to b7 to provide an escape route for the knight on a6 if white plays a3, would have maintained the dynamism in black's setup. So black played queen d4 instead. Knight c3, the only good way to meet the threat on the rook. Knight takes c3. So black has avoided losing time by retreating his knight, but on the other hand, every exchange clarifies white's structural advantage as there will be fewer black pieces to generate counterplay. Bishop takes c3. White regains his piece and is ready to answer a queen move with e6, hitting the rook on h8 and winning time to break up black's center with e takes d7 check. Black played bishop to b4. A smart move to develop the pieces and protect the queen from danger, but be careful not to move the bishop because it would lead to losing the rook on a1 as queen will capture your rook. So rook c1. Another necessary move, though white isn't too upset at being obliged to develop his queenside pieces to good squares. Bishop takes c3 check. Yet again, a piece vanishes from the board that might have caused white problems in exploiting his better pawn structure. Rook takes c3. He must take this way, or else if queen takes c3, then queen takes f4. Black gains a pawn. So after rook takes c3, black played long castle on the queen side. Black castles queen side so that the rook is developed immediately to d8, where it can support the advance of d7 to d5 or d7 to d6 to open lines before white can deploy all his pieces. Now white played c5. The pressure on d6 is increased to impair the strength of d7 to d5 breakout. Black played bishop b7. Black has no wish to help white's development with bishop takes f1. Then rook takes f1 when the rook can be activated with rook f2 and then rook d2. So after c5, since the bishop was under attack, black did not capture the bishop. Black moved the bishop to b7. Queen e3. It is necessary to challenge black's queen in order to clear the way for bishop e2 and then castle, since white was not able to castle because of the queen controlling the g1 square. So after queen e3, black played queen takes e3 check. Black doesn't want to lose time by moving his queen around, but queen b4 was a good move. Keeping the queens on the board would have been preserved counterplay after bishop e2 and then d6. So after queen takes e3 check, rook takes e3. At this crucial point, black has two options: either break free from the cramped position and neutralize white's space advantage, or endure a torturous, prospectless endgame for the rest of the game. So black decided to play d6. But after c takes d6, then c takes d6, e takes d6, rook takes, bishop e2, rook h d8, intending to play rook d2, black's fully mobilized army would compensate for the weakness on c6. But after d6, white did not capture the pawn. White played bishop to c4. This disrupts black's plans. White can disregard the threat to c5 because after d takes c5, although black might gain an extra pawn, the tripled pawns would look dreadful. Additionally, the white pawn on e5 would remain dominant without any challenge, and the black bishop on b7 would be excluded from the game. So, after bishop c4, black played king d7. Black did not capture the pawn on c5. Black king rushes to the center. h4. White's move serves a dual purpose, preventing flank attacks on the f4 pawn by g7 to g5. I mean, after h6, then g5, then attacking the f4 pawn. So white is preparing to undermine these moves and also planning to play h4, h5, then h takes g6. I mean, attacking the g6 pawn. So after h4, black played d5, a major concession as white's pawn on e5 is left unchallenged. As a protected passed pawn, nevertheless, Bacrot feels it is necessary to stabilize his pawn structure to counter white's projected thrusts with his pawns. Bishop d3. Currently, a strategic threat is posed by the move h4 to h5 in combination with g4 to forcefully push aside black pawns. So after g4, then h5, it would break the pawn structure. This will result in the creation of connected passed pawns on e and f files. So after bishop d3, black played h5. Black stops a plan but at a huge cost. A backward pawn on g6 that is open to attack. Rook g3. Here a careless move such as g3 would prevent white's attacking plan in the game. A pawn move should never be played on bim as it can never be reversed. So rook to g3. Rook h6. Black defends the pawn in such a way as to avoid being pinned on the g file. Because if rook h to g8, then rook g5. Then king e6, g4. H takes g4, h5. G takes h5, then bishop takes f5 check, followed by rook h takes h5, and white wins. So after rook h6, white played b4. Having tied a black rook down to g6, white turns its attention to the queen side, which would prove under-defended. King e6. Black hurries to get his king over to the king side. King to d2. As it is in the endgame, the king needs to be given an active role in any strategical plan. Rook a8. At last, there is an attempt to break out with a5. White played rook to b1. Now, if black plays a5, then b5 doesn't help black. So after rook b1, black played a6. So at some point, white can apply enough pressure on the a7 square using moves like bishop e2, then rook a3, rook a5, rook b3, and then rook ba3. which will force Bacrot to make this move, this a6 move which he just played eventually. So instead of waiting, Bacrot chooses to take action right away. So he played a6 right away. Rook b3, the rook heads for a3, king f7. The black king moves to f7 and provides support to the struggling pawn. Rook a3. Now black has to reckon with two schemes of attack. On the queen side, with rook a5, bishop e2 and rook ga3, and on the king side, rook g5, bishop e2, rook a g3. Now black played rook h8. All black can do is mark time and hope that his defenses hold firm. So white played rook g5, and then black played rook to h6. The rook feels obliged to return to the defense of g6. If rook h b8, then g4, h takes g4, h5, g takes h5, rook takes f5 check, king e7, or if king g7, then rook g5 check, when the connected passed pawns easily decide the game. Even if king goes to e7, these are the two connected passed pawns. So rook h6, then king c3. The white king eases forwards towards the d4 square. Rook b8, black hopes against hope that white will fall for bishop takes a6, which would lead to rook a8 when he loses the exchange. So after rook b8, white did not capture, white played rook a5. Now the rook is defended, and so bishop takes a6 is really a threat now. Black played rook a8. The rook has no choice but to return to its miserable defensive role. King d4. Total domination. Black hasn't the slightest glimmer of counterplay. His pieces are all tied down to defending pawns, whereas white's pieces are mobile and can attack on either wing as they please. Rook h8. Kasparov's winning strategy considers the potential advancement of the white pawn on e5. His pieces are all active. This e5 pawn supported by the dynamic pieces, despite the less valuable protected passed pawn in the center for black. Bishop c2. The bishop clears the third rank so that white's rook can coordinate their action. Rook a b8. Black pretends to launch an attack on b4. Bishop to d3, which persuades white that he wants the bishop on e2 rather than c2, where it ties down the black rook by attacking the a6. Rook a8. The position has been repeated. So why did Kasparov play on the 34th move bishop c2? As he is obviously not interested in a draw, perhaps he was short of time and wanted to use up a move before the time control at move 40. Or perhaps it was psychological. He wanted to demonstrate to black that he has all the time in the world to press home his attack. Or finally, Kasparov might have used the repetition to clarify his thoughts about some aspect of his plan. So after rook a8, now white played bishop to e2. Whatever the reason for the repetition, white is now back on track towards the win. This bishop retreat not only keeps a6 under threat, but introduces the idea of a sacrifice on h5 to break up the black defenses. Black played rook hb8, a most frustrating lie for a self-respecting rook. Rook a3. The winning breakthrough will require the use of all white's assets, both rooks, the bishop, and the pawn on e6. Black played rook h8. Although it is typical for rooks to demonstrate their skill in their later stages of the game, in this particular situation, even with a decrease in material, the black rooks can only move back and forth from their original squares. Rook ag3, the final preparatory move. The pressure on g6 is about to become lethal With the black bishop absent from the struggle, it is inevitable that something has to give on the king side. Rook a g8. Black has to defend the g6 square, but now a little combination finishes off the game. White played bishop takes h5 and black resigned. Because if rook takes h5, then rook takes rook, pawn takes rook, e6 check. King f8, e7 check, and black has to give up his rook. It's a deflection. And after bishop takes h5, if pawn takes bishop, then e6 check, and the pawn inevitably deflects the black king from the defense of the rook or wins. So if king f8, e7 check, king takes pawn, rook takes rook, rook takes rook, rook takes rook. Then white is not only exchanger but is ready to trap the bishop by rook to b8. So this is how Kasparov won the game. So from this game, the principles we learned: occupy the center with pawns, develop your pieces rapidly towards the center, castle as early as possible, do not move a piece twice in the opening, avoid having weak pawns like isolated, doubled or backward pawns, put pressure on enemy's pinned piece whenever possible, double up your rooks on an open file, activate your king in the endgame. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment and share and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video. Bye bye.